What's up, fam? It's the Broke Capitalist coming at you once again. It's January 17th, more than halfway through the month. And I like to draw a bright line in the sand again. Um, we're talking about, well, last video I did, I was talking about chatgpt, and I'm going to talk about it again. Since then, which is like 7 days, we were getting news stories about school boards banning chatgpt in schools. This is laughable, but hey, they got to try it, right? Initially, teachers are going to be like, hey, you can't be cheating, so to speak. And I'm sure teachers back in the day said the same thing when the calculator came out. Hey, you can't be cheating. But actually, what ends up happening is the skills the skill set, the muscle memory, whatever you want to call it, that's in your head that helps you calculate numbers, the calculator basically replaced that. You can still calculate, it just take you forever relative to the calculator. Now, ChatGPT, I think a lot of these people are seeing the writing on the wall, which I basically was talking about, I don't know, since 2017. I've honestly didn't think this would be here this fast. That's the only thing. I talked about Ross, the AI software that was taking over, just basically decimating the legal field, replacing a lot of the, I guess, I don't want to disrespect anyone by calling it grunt work, but hey, it's a term everybody knows. A lot of the discovery work that a lot of big firms do is being replaced by AI. And I think I did a video on that probably in 2019, 2020. So this ChatGPT is just it's a similar application. It's free, it's out there for everybody to use. And what's happening is I think teachers are seeing reality that the need for this army of teachers is going to dwindle. Just like in the automobile industry where it used to take maybe 100 people to make a car, and now, you go over to Tesla, it probably takes 4 people and a robot, right? So you always have those workers, just the amount of them will decrease, just like in the legal field. You always have attorneys, just the amount of the attorneys just at a certain point, it just becomes redundant, so it's unnecessary. So you don't find employment in that field. Now, what ChatGPT is doing today is basically doing what Google kind of did and taking it a step further. So Google kind of pointed you into the right direction. Like, hey, I want a book on American slavery, right? And Google will give you a list of books to read or websites that talk about that. Whereas this doesn't really, I guess you can ask them for books. Yeah, I'm sure you can. But this will analyze the subject for you. And we're going to do that in a second. I'll show you the results of a question I had. My concern has always been the same. I started this channel, it was called A New Narrative. My concern is the narrative, because the narrative is the most important thing in society, in my opinion. The narrative creates a culture that eventually does the political will of the creators of the narrative. So if you create a narrative saying that all white people are racist, you create a culture of people suspect of any white person, thinking that all their motives, intentions, and the results of their actions is because of racism. Then that culture votes for people who say, hey, we'll protect you from racism. And then once that politician gets in office, yeah, some of them care about racists and racism. But for the most part, we've seen that this has been a Trojan horse to just racism. Political racism has been used as a Trojan horse, used to push in socialist and Marxist ideology, leading toward one world government, blah, blah, blah. I've said it 1,000 times. Now, with that said, ChatGPT is going to be a tool you can't live without, similar to Google, similar to your smartphones, similar to cars. Once it's out there, they ain't gonna put this genie back in the bottle. So instead of trying to ban this, they should be trying to teach how to use it to make you a better student, I don't know, but you shouldn't try. You can't ban it. They're gonna try, but it ain't gonna work. So with that said, man, I lost my train of thought here. But back to banning GPTs, it's not gonna work. These teachers, a lot of them will lose their jobs. In 2022, if you were in college getting a degree in the social sciences like English, history, politics, all the information you need is on the smartphone. I probably can't see it. So that degree is basically useless, in my opinion. There was an argument. I was talking about the narrative. I got it back. But let me circle back. There was an argument between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, and it's famous. If you know, I'll just go over briefly. Booker T. Washington was concerned with the Black community obtaining skills basically other people will pay for, where Du Bois he didn't ignore that entirely, but he was concerned about equity. Sound familiar? Booker T. Washington. I mean, this argument took place in the late 1800s. So equity isn't a new term. It's a socialist, communist, Marxist term. And if you don't know, Du Bois ended up dying broke in an African country as a communist. So communism don't work for nobody, white, black, or other. So back to this narrative thing. It is extremely important on what is put into the narrative, because ChatGPT is only going to give you what's put in, right? It's like code, computer, bad code in, bad out, right? So if everything going in, if ChatGPT, that AI is pulling information and all that information is left-leaning, your 5-year-old will wake up in a world that won't know anything about what's called the right. And this goes both ways. If everything this AI was pulling had the lean towards like fundamental Christianity, I don't like that either, right? So it should be centralist in its presentation of facts. And hopefully that will be the case, but I truly doubt it. And we'll go into why I think that by showing you something I asked of ChatGPT. Yes, I asked to provide a 200-word paper on the percentage of Americans who owned slaves a year before the Civil War. And the result was an instant 200-word paper. I mean, this is amazing stuff, man. I mean, literally 200 words in like 2-3 seconds. All right, according to the data from the 1860 census, which I like, they gave a source. Approximately 4 million enslaved Africans and African Americans were held in bondage in the United States 1 year before the Civil War. I have a problem with that. There was no such thing technically as an African American because there was no citizenship granted to Africans, people of African descent before prior to the end of the Civil War. This represents approximately 13% of the total population of the country at the time, which amazingly, we've been pretty consistent population-wise. We're about 12, 13% now. Let me see, the percentage of Americans who own slaves vary greatly depending on location. In the southern states where the majority of the enslaved people were held, nearly 1 in 4 white households own slaves. I totally reject this. Now, it is true in some cases that half the population, like in South Carolina and Mississippi, were slaves, but there's no way 1 in 4 owned a slave. Now, 1 in 4 may have utilized slaves because they may have rented a slave from somebody from time to time, which was pretty widespread. But ownership of a slave was very expensive. People in the South were very poor. There was no industry there. You were just a farmer or a plantation owner with slaves that farmed. I mean, so where you going? Where you getting your money if you to even own a slave? But anyway, I digress. That's an important thing, though. That is very important that they get that right. But anyway, where was I at? So, however, it is important to note that the percentage of slave holders does not provide a complete picture of the extent of the institution of slavery in the United States. Many non-slaveholding whites in the South and border states benefited economically from the labor of enslaved people, even if they did not personally own slaves. Okay, narrative. Right? The narrative now is all white folks are evil and all white folks benefited from slavery. That's the narrative, but is that the truth? Is it a partial truth? Is it a half truth, right? Did all white people benefit from slavery? So you mean to tell me that the mill worker in Maine benefited from slavery below the Mason-Dixon line? I mean, to what degree? Right? I mean, you could say I benefit from the factory worker in China because I got a cheap iPhone. Right? At some, the connection gets too loose for me, right? And it just makes this connection that all white people are bad, which isn't the case. And the reason why that is important is because California right now is trying to give Black folks reparations based off of this narrative, right? They're trying to say, in part, based off of this narrative, that hey, Andre deserves at least $250,000 in reparations because his ancestors didn't benefit from slavery, but Joe, the white guy, ancestors did benefit from slavery. And I just think that's more politically motivated to get votes than the actual repair a wound. Now, I'm not going to go all into that, but I hope you can see how a narrative can be used to our detriment. I mean, our meaning white, Black, Asian, other Americans, right? So here we go. Many non-slave holding whites in the South and border states benefited economically from the labor of enslaved persons, even if they didn't personally own slaves. Additionally, the financial value of enslaved people was significant, and many white Americans, including those in the North, held investments in the form of bonds and stocks in companies that relied on the labor of enslaved people. And I guarantee you'll find less than 1% of those who were poor white farmers in the North or South. The people who benefited are the people who benefit now, like the multimillionaire, billionaire class, right? Very few people in number, right? Overall, the institution of slavery was a deeply ingrained and integral part of the economy and society of the United States in the years leading up to the Civil War. True, the percentage of Americans who owned slaves was a significant minority, which is true. Now, I have books dating back to prior to the Civil War. I have books that says less than 11% of all Americans own slaves. So North, South, East, West, less than 11% actually owned a slave, right? So the percentage of Americans who owned slaves was a significant minority, but the effects of slavery were felt throughout the country. It was one of the main causes of American Civil War, and the abolition of slavery was a key factor in the end of the war. So I can appreciate this, but it is something to be concerned about, because although I know, I consider myself an expert on the subject of slavery in America, The average person doesn't. So who controls the narrative, controls the culture, controls the politics. And it's important that we stay vigilant on the narrative out there that's pushed by Hollywood, that's pushed by your local news, national news, and things like that. So before I go, I was just thinking about something when I was at Whole Foods the other day, and hopefully you guys have blessed me with some comments on this subject. What is more detrimental to you, the individual, and your individual family? The technology, the ever-increasing technology that's replacing a lot of labor, and someday probably all labor, or inflation? And I'll put some context around that question. So I was in Whole Foods and I'm looking at, I'm at the line and I'm talking to the register, and they were like, yeah, sometimes I don't know why we were talking about this, but sometimes I had to stock food. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you stock and you do the register. Sometimes you bag the clothes, you probably go get the cards, whatever. You put prices here and there. Okay. And then I thought, well, I'm pretty sure. Now I know Whole Foods have good healthcare benefits, I've heard, but I'm pretty sure they're not living in a mansion off that salary. So it's my assumption that that salary needs to be supported with another salary, either their own salary, a second job, or their spouse or partner's job, in order for that person to live in an apartment or a house, have a car, and possibly support a child. I don't think you support several children off of one salary at Whole Foods. However, if you think about the unskilled labor of an auto factory worker in 75, who basically took this transaxle and put it over here, took another transaxle, put it over here, took another transaxle, put it over here, did that 8 hours a day for 30 years. They can support themselves and 7, 8 other people off one salary. So I think the fact that our inflation is gone through the roof since we've taken ourselves off the gold standard and other things, it's been more detrimental to the individual and the family than the advent of technological breakthroughs. But what do you guys think? Leave me a comment if you would. And check me out tomorrow on the Hangout with Rethinking the Dollar and Tom. There's Mike from Rethinking the Dollar and Tom from The Coming Crisis, who's on Rumble. I'll leave a link to that conversation after it airs tomorrow. And with that, I hope you're having a great day. Stay safe out there. Peace. I'm out.